Carissa, from a professor and clinical psychologist from Rosemead School of Psychology, and my community is in Glendora. So I'm so grateful and honored to be responding to the panel discussion this morning on well-being and health in the life of the church. As a person who takes part in the life of the church and a mental health professional, it's so inspiring to hear a real-life example of what wellness and health looks like in the life of the church, and to reflect on what we can learn from the panelists. So what was shared today in the panel seems to embody what is described by Scott McKnight as the goodness culture. Nope. Whoops. Oh, there it is. So Scott McKnight wrote this book called Tove, The Church Called Tove, Forming a Goodness Culture That Resists Abuse of Power and Promotes Healing. Tov is the Hebrew word for good or goodness. And according to McKnight, the word Tov appears in the Bible 700 times, describing God himself, God's design for creation, God's design for moral virtues, so what we're called to become and to do, that we're called to do good. And this is also the word the scripture uses to describe the life and teaching of Jesus, as well as the gospel that we know as good news. He argues that one of the most important things about a church is its culture. This is a quote from his book, Culture Affects Everyone. There's no unenculturated person anywhere in the world. No one is unrelated, unnetworked, unembedded, unenmeshed, or unsystemic. In the book, he makes the point that ultimately, it is culture that either perpetuates goodness or toxicity in a church. So, how does a culture either perpetuate goodness or toxicity? So, on the left here, I have a diagram that is from the book. So, he talks about how the leaders of the church guide the church toward a certain culture through its narratives, actions, teachings, and policies. And as we see in Grace Life English Ministry, through their relationships with one another, through how they relate with one another, through the time that they take in nurturing their relationships, through the flexibility in the hierarchy, through the trust that they build, and through the love that they have for one another. And in turn, right, so culture is co-created. So in turn, the leaders set the culture of the church through what it communicates, through what it embodies, and the congregation sees and hears what the leaders are communicating, reinterprets that cultural message, and reenacts and lives it in the life of the church. Right? And so Scott McKnight says that culture, right, and the next diagram there, then becomes its own agent. Oh, sorry, still the other one. Yeah, thank you. So culture becomes its own transformative agent. So it seems that what has happened in Grace Life is that the culture itself either attracts the people who's attracted to the culture, or and then people who don't fit the culture then leave, right? And so what I heard from the panelists today, I think what really stood out to me, and I met with Eugene and Carol before today to kind of hear more about what they were going to share. And they said that during their retreat, when they identified their beliefs and values, they identified these values as the values of the church: hospitality, kindness, authenticity, safety, being non-judgmental, and being inclusive as important values in their church. And you might notice that all of those values are relationally oriented. And so what I heard from the panelists today is that they are intentional and focused on building goodness culture that embodies relational health. And so then what does that look like in the life of the church? They apply good communication principles based on some psychology and counseling literature, things that we do and reinforce in group therapy and family therapy and couples therapy into their community life. Right? So that includes appreciating the emotional life, includes fostering safety and authenticity. So in our Zoom meeting previous to today, Carol shared that they reinforce in the life group using I statements. So identifying thoughts and feelings using I statements, moving from judgment to curiosity. So when feeling judgmental about someone's words or actions, moving from judgment to I wonder. So I wonder what she and he was feeling or thinking at that time, and I wonder what my own reaction says about me. Right? I think these are just some beautiful ways of fostering safety, authenticity, and connection in the community life. So Scott McKnight says, as the congregation lives out these values, they further shape the culture of the church, which, as McKnight underscores, becomes its own transformative agent in the life of the church. So the next thing I'm going to share is taken from psychology literature, which is from this book called Cultural Psychotherapy by Martine Laroche. This is, so Jessica and I didn't confer about this, but it's the same idea, right? The 3 levels of conceptualization when we think about any psychological construct, whether it be wellness, mental health, or resilience. And so, yeah, on the individual level, we can, typically this is where we talk about personality, mental health symptoms, and even diagnosis. But we need to always, LaRoche argues that we always need to think about any of these psychological constructs from 3 levels, right? Individual, relational, and contextual. And so, so much of wellness and mental health at the individual level are impacted by the relational web that the individual is in, as well as our context, right? And so many of the therapists in the room probably can relate to this, the experience of working with someone in individual therapy, and either the social support of that person either hinders or amplifies the good work that's being done in individual therapy, right? Some of you may have experience when working with an individual and they have really good roommates or spouses that support their health and growth. It just amplifies our work by multiple times, right? Now, the contextual level, right, it includes social, political, economic, and historic forces. So some examples of these are stereotypes, discrimination, and violence in the community. So Jessica mentions earlier about the dual pandemic, right? The COVID-19 pandemic and the racial pandemic that many of us had to experience. And so this is an example, again, of how context impact us, and how context impacts us differently depending on our social locations. And so another example of this is the model minority myth, and that is a part of our context as Asian Americans, and that this impacts our individual well-being and our relational well-being, in that it impacts the ways that marginalizations and even mental health struggles tend to be overlooked and minimized. And so ideally, we would like to see Tove permeating all 3 levels of this model. And I think we can think on a larger scale. This is not something that we're going to kind of solve today and figure out today. But on a larger scale, we can think about what is the role of the church in bringing about goodness at the individual, relational, and contextual levels. I think historically the church has been involved in advocacy, in bringing about goodness at the contextual level. An example of this would be the role of the Black church in the civil rights movement. Historically, again, the church has been instrumental in establishing schools and hospitals and responding to poverty in the community. But as I was listening to the panel today, right, I think we can't be all things to all people, right? And I think it's important to reflect on what is it that our church, our community, me as a mental health professional, what are we called to? And as I was listening to the panel discussion today, what came to mind was the role of the church in bringing goodness at the relational level of human functioning. In particular, the church is intentional in bringing relational health and wellness to its community. And they've encouraged me to reflect on how this relationally healthy space could become a transformative agent and a healing space as people navigate the challenges in life. And it could be challenges at all the levels, right? It could be individual challenges. What is the role of the church in supporting people as we navigate through health or mental health? What is the role of the church in bringing relational health to support people through difficulties in marriage and in family relationships? And what is the role of relational health in providing a protective factor or a buffer for some of the contextual negative impact that we experience as Asian Americans, right? And so social support is one of the things that is most consistently shown in research as being so good for our wellness and mental health, right? It's correlated with a lot of positive outcome. And I think even more than this, I think Grace Life is trying to kind of help us think about what is the role of facilitating deep, authentic, and safe relationships in which vulnerability can be experienced? And in what ways can this become a healing and transformative agent for people as we navigate individual, relational, and contextual challenges? I'm gonna share an example from my own life. This past weekend was Mother's Day, and New York Times had an article on millennial moms. And so I thought, I'm a millennial and I'm a mom. So let me see what this article has to say. Well, this article talks about millennial mom midlife crisis. MMMC. They even have an abbreviation for it, okay? And so they talk about how MMMC is actually, it's not like kind of your stereotypical midlife crisis, right? Millennial moms aren't kind of getting sports cars and, going gambling or, having an affair or whatever, right? Like it's not your typical midlife crisis. It's what they call the self-improvement treadmill. They talk about how, I know, it hits a chord. I see you. I feel you. Now, why are millennial moms particularly vulnerable to this? And this is a part of our context, part of our contextual factors here. We are the first generations, apparently, to step into parenthood with Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok readily available. And so one way in which this manifests is that we see influencer moms on social media with their hair and makeup beautifully done, and on their upper baby strollers, and their house is so neat and everything is Montessori, right? And so then we're like, oh my gosh, I am such a failure, right? And so this self-comparison happens, and so this becomes a part of our midlife crisis, apparently, right? Like where we're perpetually trying to be better. And I think as Asians and Asian Americans, we also have a unique challenge in that this comparison doesn't only happen on like what visually a mother should look like, but also how do we parent our kids. And I think for a lot of Asians and Asian Americans, many of us are trying to sift through the good things that have been transferred to us from our parents, and we're also trying to navigate what are some things that we don't want to transfer to our kids. What are some things we want to do differently? And as we're trying to do this, we are bombarded by messages and influencers saying, this is what you should do, this is what gentle parenting means, and what gentle parenting doesn't mean, right? And so then we get caught in this frenzy of how to become a mother, how to become a parent. And so this is, right, a part of our context. This is how our context influence our own well-being in our parenting, in our relationships, in our individual well-being. So for me, the protective factor, the buffer, has been my life group. I am a part of a life group for parents with young children. And it is in these conversations in the day-to-day where we're all in the playground and dealing with tantrums and seeing how each other responds to it or fails to respond to it, right? And it is in these moments where it becomes safe, authentic, connecting, and vulnerable, and where I get to experience what real life parenting looks like, not like how they show it on social media. And so doing this together as Christians, as Christian Asian Americans, and who are trying to see how to live out the gospel in our own parenting along with one another, receiving the gospel and grace in our own self has been one of the protective factors in navigating through this context. So the panel discussion today has given us much to think about. And so a few reflection questions that I'd like to think about further and invite all of you to consider with me are: how would you characterize the relational culture of your church community? To what extent is your community intentional about the culture that it creates? And to the therapists in the room, what are some ways in which you'd be able to bring in helpful psychological principles and practices in supporting relational health in the church? Thank you very much.